This is a video I've been wanting to do for quite some time. This is a tier list of the bosses in the three Dark Souls games and in Demon Souls. I'm not including Sekiro or Bloodborne because I haven't played either. So I have kind of a hybrid tier list. It's not exactly based on difficulty, and it's not exactly based on enjoyment. It's kind of a mixture of a couple different things. So maybe let's just go over the categories. Unfair, overpowered, or unfun. These aren't necessary gimmick bosses, but these are bosses that I think are just kind of bullshit. Like, they're there to troll you. There's some aspect of it that just ruins it or makes it an unfun or unpleasant boss fight. Or there's some aspect of it that I just think is fundamentally unfair. So that's the first category. The next category we have are bosses that I would say are just brutally difficult. So these are bosses that are just really hard to deal with, some of the hardest bosses in the game, but the fights aren't necessarily broken. And I'm sure you can guess a couple who are going to go into there. Tough but fair, which is probably the best bosses in the franchise. These are bosses that are very difficult, but there's ways you can deal with it. You can get the patterns down, you can change your strategy around. You might die a couple of times, but they're not impossible. And they're not really the bosses that you're going to rage quit the game over. We have build dependent. Some bosses are very resistant to magic, and some bosses the AI just can't deal with ranged attacks. So it really depends on what your build is. I normally play heavy a tank, heavy melee build. So some bosses are just extremely easy for me that are very hard for casters, and some bosses are extremely hard for me that are very easy for casters. Next, we just have moderate or normal bosses. Bosses you might die once or twice to, but aren't really anything to write home about. Bosses that are a total joke and aren't even really boss fights. And gimmick bosses, and I'm sure everybody knows what gimmick bosses are. So that being said, let's get into this. Vanguard. That is the first boss in Demon Souls if you choose to do the tutorial level. I'm just gonna put him into moderate or normal. I think he kills you in one shot, but it wasn't that difficult. Okay, so by the way, I'm ranking these based on a combination of my experience, what I think an average player would feel going through it for the first time, how hard I've heard other people say it is, and how well or poor I think the boss fight is structured. So he gets moderate or normal. Phalanx, I don't really remember too much about it. I think I beat that the first time without dying, so I'm just going to give Phalanx a normal or average. The only thing that kind of sucks about the Phalanx is you have to beat it before you can level up, if memory serves. Tower Knight is a little difficult. I'm going to put him into it's either build dependent or tough but fair. My experience with Demon Souls is a bit different because I played it after playing the three Dark Souls games. So I was used to kind of a higher difficulty level. So I didn't die that many times on most of the bosses in it compared to how many times I died the first time I played DS1. Tower Knight, I was a caster and I had the mana regeneration item, so I just kind of took pot shots at him. So I'm gonna go with build dependent, but he seemed harder than a lot of other bosses. The arachnid thing, I don't really remember too much about it. I think I died once. I think that's somewhere between moderate or normal and a gimmick, because you're fighting him in this weird hallway and he keeps knocking you back or something. Now, Flame Lurker is an interesting one because people tell me that he is the hardest boss in Demon Souls. For me, if I was going to go by my experience, he would be in the total joke category. With the exception of a boss I'm sure everyone knows, he was the easiest boss in the game for me. So what happened was I was a caster and I was hiding behind, I think it's like a skeleton or a rock or something in his area, and he got stuck on it and he was glitching through it. So I just kept shooting him from the other side of the wall and he kept taking damage. So I think I only got shot once when I was fighting Flame Lurker, but people say he's really difficult and he looks really difficult. And I think he deserves to almost be up here because the run to get to him is one of the single worst boss runs in any of the Dark Souls games because you have to do platforming in a game that's not designed in any way, shape, or form for platforming. So he's kind of hard to place because he could be in any of these categories. I think I'll just put him into jeez, brutally difficult as kind of an average of what people say about him, the boss run, that sort of thing. Dragon God is obviously a gimmick boss fight. I hated the boss fight. If you don't have the Thief's Ring for it, you're basically fucked. A stealth boss fight is kind of an interesting idea, but it's not really the franchise to pull that in. Fool's Idol is also a gimmick boss fight. For those of you who haven't played Demon Souls, you have to go up. So the battle takes place in a church, and you have to, before you fight the boss, you have to go up onto the second level of the church and kill someone. Otherwise, Fool's Idol will keep regenerating or coming back to life or something like that. The actual boss fight I thought was pretty fun, but it's a gimmick boss fight. Man-eaters, I recall being somewhat challenging, but not too bad. I don't think I died fighting them. It's kind of like a less developed version of the Belfry Gargoyle, so I thought that was an okay fight. Old Monk is a gimmick boss. Either you fight the Old Monk himself, which I recall being extremely easy, or they summon a player in to fight. Now, I was playing this on my PS3 after the main server shut down, so I was playing it on a private server that had mostly hardcore people. So it summoned someone from like New Game +6, and I couldn't even damage them the first time. Then I just unplugged my PS3 from the internet, and I like one-shotted him the next time. Adjudicator, I can't really remember much about. A lot of these bosses, because I had the MP regeneration item, I just kind of cheesed them by firing a couple times, hiding at the back with the Thieves Ring, then coming back out, firing a couple times, and going back. So some of these might be harder. Old Hero, I really can't even remember this boss fight, so put him into moderate. Storm King is one of the few good gimmick boss fights. I really enjoyed it. You fight a whole bunch of like giant flying manta rays, and you get the Storm Ruler, which shows up again in Dark Souls 3. But it's a lot of fun. You just fire these giant, like, I forget if it's beams or like these wedges or whatever, and bring them down. So that's all good fun. Leechmonger, I remember, maybe it was because I did that level last, but I remember him being just extremely easy. But I think I beat him in a really short amount of time. That might even be in like the total joke category. Once again, it's a little hard to say how hard Demon Souls was because I did kind of play the game in a very specific way. And a combination of the Thieves Ring and distance casting meant a lot of the time the bosses didn't even look at me. I don't really regard that as cheating. I think if you finish a Souls game and reach the credit scene, no matter what you do, that's a legitimate playthrough. But just because I've only played the game once, I'm gonna probably put him in. I'm just gonna put these guys in that category because I don't really know. Old King Alon is supposed to be one of the hardest bosses. I didn't die fighting him. Um, I didn't find him particularly difficult, but I was very much over leveled. I used my strategy of just cheesing it by doing long range combat. Maiden Estrella has probably the best music in Demon Souls. I did enjoy it, the boss fight. It is very disturbing, but once again, it's a gimmick boss fight where you either have to figure out some way to get past her guardian and kill her, or do like what I did and cheese it by shooting her guardian from long distance with magic, or I don't know, somehow get through the plague babies. It's kind of an interesting boss fight, but it's a gimmick, so it can't really be rated higher. And King of Launt can either be total joke or gimmick. I'm just going to put it in the total joke category. I'm not even really sure if he can hit you. Okay, so Asylum Demon. The first, we're going to get into the bosses I actually remember more now. I think the bosses had a lot more personality after Demon Souls. I feel like for Demon Souls, because they had to put a boss at the end of each area, they were just kind of like, let's just put another spider or put another, like, let's do the Leechmonger and Dirty Colossus. They aren't similar at all. Um, is kind of the impression I got. They were just trying to make stuff up to fill up the boss total. So Asylum Demon is kind of tricky. It depends how much of a noob you are. Okay, so firstly, for the Dark Souls bosses, if you're playing an old version of it for PC and you don't have the patch, every single boss on this list would go into this category because the game just doesn't work and you're completely fucked because you will just not be able to dodge or anything. If this is your first Souls game, the Asylum Demon can be pretty difficult because none of the other enemies in the level are very aggressive or really do much, but he can kind of just blow you out pretty easily. That being said, if you can get the drop on him, I'm gonna probably just put him in the normal category. So Taurus Demon is another tricky one. I died probably 4 or 5 times against him because I was playing the game without the DS fix. So it ran like shit. Also, I just didn't know what I was doing. So he could be total joke, moderate, or gimmick boss. Because there is a way to beat him where you have to climb up to the second level of the tower, kill the 2 skeleton archers, and then do a plunging attack on him. I'm going to probably put him into the moderate or normal because even though he's a joke on subsequent playthroughs, on your first playthrough, you don't really know what you're doing. And something I find with a lot of Souls bosses is even if the boss isn't that difficult, you just get into the boss arena and you immediately get attacked. You don't know what the hell's going on. You don't know what the arena looks like. You don't know what the gimmick is. And you often will just die because you can't even process what's happening. Like some of the bosses on this list, I didn't really have that much of a trouble with. It's just the first time I went in, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Belfry Gargoyles are one of probably the more memorable bosses in Dark Souls. I'm gonna put them in the tough but fair category. There's what's known as a wake up boss, where they're in the game specifically to be a skill check to you. That if you've just been cheesing it or you haven't learned how to block or dodge or something, then you're just kind of fucked if you're fighting the Bell Gargoyles. They don't have very much health, which is nice. If you've upgraded your weapons at all, you should be able to slice through them pretty quick. It's the first boss battle though where you're fighting 2 enemies at once, and that can get a little difficult. If you don't know you can cut off the one gargoyle's tail, that makes it a little more difficult too. I think part of it is it's just kind of a bit overwhelming at that part in the game when you're suddenly faced with 2 enemies. You might just die the first time you play it because you aren't expecting it. But if you learn how to manage it to keep like one of them only fighting one of them at the time, it's really not that difficult to fight. Moonlight Butterfly could either be total joke or build dependent. I'm going to say build dependent because if you have a ranged build, you can shoot it while it's up in the air. If not, you just have to roll around like a moron and then attack it when it lands. Despite the music being rather good, it is one of the worst boss fights. It could also be a gimmick boss, too. I'm just going to put it into build dependent, I guess. The Capra Demon is our first unfair, overpowered, or unfun boss fight, in which it's basically just a troll. So, for those of you who haven't played Dark Souls 1, the Capra Demon is an extremely aggressive, high damaging enemy, but one who, once you can kind of focus on them, as with most bosses, you can just block his attacks. He's not very difficult to get behind or dodge. But you fight him in an extremely small area, and these 2 dogs also spawn. So you get in there and you just panic because you don't know what the fuck's going on. The 2 dogs attack you. You're not really sure what you're even supposed to be hitting. And the Capra Demon comes up and just destroys you. And you have to, like, once you figure it out, it's not too bad, but you have to, like, go in, trick the dogs to like chase you up the stairs, the Capra Demon to chase you up the stairs, figure out how to kill the two dogs right away, and then the Capra Demon's not very difficult, but it's just basically kind of a troll, and it's just kind of there to fuck with you, and it's not fun. Um, Other than just to show your friends. Gaping Dragon's a total joke. I almost never take damage from this boss fight. It's I beat this guy on my first try the first time playing it. He looks kind of intimidating with the giant mouth on the bottom of him, but overall he's just kind of a joke. I'm gonna put Chaos Witch Quelaag into the tough but fair category. I admit I haven't ever soloed this boss. I'm sure she's much, much more difficult. I normally summon whatever the weird guy is with the board shield to distract her. She's a good example of a hyper aggressive boss that has a pretty wide range of attacks. She really comes at you hard with her sword, and while she's pretty easy to dodge or block, because she's so aggressive, she doesn't really give you much time to counterattack. If you have a summon, the boss fight is much, much easier as you can break up her aggro a bit. She's kind of like Gwyn or some of the other, or Artorias, or even Sith, in that the issue with the fight is just you don't have that many it can be kind of difficult to counterattack. I died against her a couple times the first time playing the game. It is one of the boss fights I do enjoy more. I did like that. Ceaseless Discharge is a gimmick boss fight. I've never actually beat him without using the gimmick to insta kill him. I just don't find it very fun. I'm not good enough at dodging to do it. It's just a joke. Like, his name is Ceaseless Discharge. What do you expect? Iron Golem is somewhere between moderate or total joke. I might put him in total joke. The only time I've ever died against him was wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and I rolled off of the ledge. I can't recall ever really having any sort of trouble with him. He's slow, highly telegraphed, and easy to get behind. Stray Demon, I'm actually going to put in tough but fair. I have issues with this boss just because some of his abilities are kind of hard to dodge. Like, some of his AoE attacks are actually pretty potent. So I don't have a ton to say about Stray Demon, just that it's more difficult. It's a lot more difficult than the Asylum Demon was. Crossbreed Priscilla, I don't really remember much about her. I remember having pretty low health and dying pretty easily, so I don't even really have an impression. Actually, I'm not even sure if I've ever fought her. Because I couldn't bring myself to kill a dragon QT. Sorry. Dark Souls is all about saving helpless women. So I'm gonna for Ornstein and Smo, I'm gonna put them in brutally difficult. This boss fight is not unfair. It's a wake up boss fight where you're getting ganked, and the bosses are just a lot harder than what you faced previously. I would not say it's unfair though. Once you kind of figure out how to manage the two of them, it's a lot easier if you kill Ornstein first, both because he's more aggressive and because Lightning Smo is just a lot easier to deal with. There's even pillars to kind of break up the aggro a bit. It's just the fight can go on for quite some time because it's a two phaser, and if you don't know the like twist, you might get into the situation where uh you just kind of get destroyed. You run out of healing potions or something. But I think it's a good boss fight. Definitely one of the more memorable from the game. It's not even that it's that hard. It comes at a time in the game where you're starting to kind of figure out what you're doing, but it's just a huge jump in difficulty. Replaying it though, it's not difficult, but it was at the time. Sif I might actually put in tough but fair. Sif is ultra aggressive, which is kind of difficult. He's fairly easy to block or dodge, but once again, it's one of those cases where you first come in, he just immediately just starts wailing on you, and you might not know really what to do. Nevertheless, it's one of my favorite boss fights in the game. Four Kings is build dependent. I died once fighting him because I got in the battle and I didn't know what was even going on. But if you're a tank or high or heavy weapons build, this boss fight is laughably easy. The Four Kings don't really have much of a damage output, and as the whole fight is DPS based, I forget if it was a plus 10 Zweihander or like a fully upgraded Demon's Great Machete, but I just had extremely high alpha damage. So I was just blowing through them. I was actually having to wait for the next one to spawn because I was going through them so fast. So if you have some sort of tank build, it's pretty easy to kind of tank their damage and just focus on killing them before the next one can spawn. But once again, it's very build dependent. It can be like moderate, it can be a joke, or it can be brutally difficult if you're, I think, a caster. It's hard. Pinwheel is a joke. I don't think anyone really needs to talk about him. By the time you fight him, he was originally, I think, supposed to be fought a lot earlier in the game. He doesn't have very much in the way of health, and he kind of falls apart like a wet paper bag in one shot. Great Lord Nito is another build dependent boss. If you're once again a tank heavy weapon boss, he's pretty damn easy, especially if you have a holy weapon. He's not particularly resistant to physical damage, if memory serves. I think he is resistant to magic, and because he has all of the little skeletons helping him out. If you have a big, wide-ranging weapon like a Zweihander, or even something like a claymore or a longsword, you can hack through all his guys pretty easily while also damaging him. I guess even if you have some decent pyromancy, I found him a pretty easy boss, but people who are casters tell me he's quite difficult. Demon Fire Sage, same thing as Stray Demon. I don't have a ton to say about him, just a lot of his attacks are kind of hard to dodge. Now we have the second character for unfair, overpowered, or unfun. It's not that the Centipede Demon is really difficult. It's you have to fight him on this tiny piece of land, and you have that neon bright lava that burns your eyes out. Overall, the boss fight is just kind of a slog fest that's not very difficult. I remember he has quite a bit of health and takes a long time to kill too. It's just one of the single worst aspects of DS1 and one of the worst boss fights in any of the games. Bed of Chaos is a gimmick boss. It's arguably the worst gimmick boss in the entire franchise. What's even worse about it is until you figure out that it saves progress if you die after killing one of its two side things, you think you're completely fucked because it's hard to not die at least once on it. I can do it now without dying, but the first time I played the game and I got one of the side things done, I'm like, okay, now I'm getting somewhere, and then I immediately died and I just screamed at the computer. People might disagree with this one. I'm gonna put Seath the Scaleless into this category. Not so much because of Seath himself, although he has petrification in memory serves, but just the run to get to him through the crystal mines is really annoying. The crystal mines is one of the worst levels in the game, and just having to memorize invisible platforms or eyeball when stuff falls on them is just a massive pain. And even if the boss isn't that difficult, I hate long boss runs. There's going to be a couple more bosses on this who are going to be there solely because of how long the boss run is to them. And he's one of them. Dark Sun Gwendolyn, I don't really remember much about. I just remember chasing him down and killing him because I beat him when I was near the end of the game. Gwen Lord of Cinder is another boss that could be gimmick, total joke, to brutally difficult. If you can parry, he is a total joke or a gimmick. If you cannot parry, he is in the brutally difficult category. I cannot parry because my reflexes aren't very good. I died more on Gwen than any other boss in the game. Gwen is very aggressive, very strong, and he blows through the obstacles that are there to break up the aggro. I just found it a very difficult but very satisfying boss fight, especially as it's later echoed by the Soul of Cinder. So Gwen is either really hard or extremely easy based on whether or not you can carry. Sanctuary Guardian, I remember just being extremely difficult as he's really fast and really strong. Knight Artorias is really hard. Once again, like Gwyn and like um what's it called? Quaylog. He's just extremely aggressive, extremely fast, and his tempo can be a little bit weird. So I did find him a fairly difficult boss battle. I died a couple times against him. If I played against him now, I'd probably do a lot better, but it was my first time playing a Souls game, and I resorted to using a Great Shield to just tank his attacks. Now I'd probably be able to dodge at least some of them, but he is a very challenging boss. Black Dragon Calamite I've never actually fought. I completely missed him when I played the expansion pack, and I didn't even find him. Manus Father of the Abyss I didn't find super difficult, but I summoned Sif and I used the pendant to deflect his whatever homing soul mass. Overall, though, I found that a really fun and satisfying boss fight and a really good way to end the DLC. A very satisfying end to it. A difficult boss, but I thought a pretty fair one. Moving on to Dark Souls 2 and the billion bosses in it. The last giant is a complete and total joke. The only thing that makes the boss fight slightly difficult is he's one of the bosses where you kind of get bored fighting him because he has a decent amount of health and it can just take some time to kill him. And the more bored you get, the more likely he is to hit you. And he does do a lot of damage if he manages to hit you. But overall, it's just not very difficult. Now, the Pursuer is somewhere between here and there. So, the Pursuer is the wake up boss in Dark Souls 2, in that he's ultra aggressive, has a lot of HP, and does a lot of damage. There is a way to beat him that almost would make him a gimmick boss, but it's quite difficult to do, and you almost need a summon in order to do it. While it's extremely easy to dodge him by just keep going right or block his attacks, what can happen during the Pursuer boss fight is he has so much health and you probably don't have very good weapons at that point in the game that you just get bored and you start getting greedy. So you're supposed to like keep circling him, take a couple hits, keep circling him, but because it takes so long you get bored and then you start taking more risks than you need to. And he's a boss that very heavily punishes risk taking. So, yeah, he's kind of somewhere in between. I don't like bosses that are dependent upon huge HP pools in order to blow you out. Dragon Rider is just a fairly typical early game boss. I don't really have any issue with him. Old Dragon Slayer, once again, fairly typical early game boss. Don't have much to say about him. Flexible Sentry is somewhere. Actually, it's hard because if I include the run to the boss, he might actually be up because he's not difficult, but the run to him is really long. So if you die, it kind of sucks. Same thing with Flexible Sentry. Flexible Sentry's not that difficult, but there's a really long boss run to him. So I'm going to put him here. I thought that was a pretty fun boss fight, actually. As with a lot of bosses in this series, he's a boss where you get in and you see this giant thing and you freak out. And you might die the first time because you just don't know what the fuck's even going on. But if you just kind of calm down, you realize he's not too easy to dodge or outmaneuver, and he's actually relatively easy to kill. Ruined Sentinels could either be tough but fair, or gimmick, or even moderate difficult. If you know the secret to beating them, they're probably moderate. If you don't know the secret to beating them, they're fairly difficult, especially without a summon. For those of you who don't know the secret, when you first enter the room, you stand on a kind of a raised platform. If you stay there for a bit, the first Ruined Sentinel will come up and you can kill him. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you can kill two of them before jumping down to fight the third. That way, you're not getting ganked. If you're getting ganked by all three of them at the time, it's incredibly difficult. But if you can even get rid of one, the remaining two are feasible to take care of, and one of them is not challenging at all. They're one of the enemies that appears as they're one of the bosses that appears as a regular enemy later on. Belfry gargoyles are I'm gonna put them in kind of. It's hard. They could be here, they could be here, or they could be here. I'm gonna put them into the gimmick category. So it's basically we're just gonna take the bell gargoyles from the first game, and we're just gonna make a whole bunch more of them and just swarm you. You know, and I'm gonna go with this. They aren't too difficult, but it's just a really annoying, unfun boss that's just there to call out the previous game. Lost Sinner is pretty fun. Um, it's she can actually get pretty difficult on New Game Plus, and if you use Bonfire Aesthetics, if you use the secret of the light, it becomes a lot easier. It's one of those hyper aggressive bosses, but if you can get the moves down, you can block and dodge pretty easily. I'd say it's a pretty fun boss fight. The only issue is there's a pretty long run up to it. Executioner Chariot is a gimmick boss. It's just not really fun. It's the less said about Executioner's Chariot, the better. Skeleton Lords are a build dependent boss. If you're playing a heavy weapon tank build, you can just slice through them like a hot knife through butter. Great swords are really good at killing multiple enemies at once. And as a boss fight where you're fighting multiple enemies at once, they're really good at for that. I'd imagine as a caster, it's probably not very fun. Covetous Demon is the easiest boss in the entire Souls franchise, other than maybe King Allant. If you don't know the secret, you shoot one of the pots from the ceiling with a heavy crossbow. The body falls down. He spends all his time eating the body, and you can just wail on him without him doing anything. Myth of the Baneful Queen is either um, there or there, depending on whether or not you figured out her secret. If you haven't figured out her secret, she regenerates health. If you did, she's not that difficult. Again, she's a boss I just don't particularly enjoy, so I don't normally summon the Jester. Smelter Demon, I'm putting in the brutal difficult category. You don't fight him that late in the game, so you're probably not that strong. Also, he has one of the single most brutal boss runs in a soul game. There's just so many enemies that all do a lot of damage. There's flamethrowers. It's very easy to fall off the platforms and die from that. I died so many times fighting him. There's also people who snipe you with arrows, but I actually started to the enemy stopped respawning when I was fighting him. He's also just a very difficult boss in general. Um, he has very irregular attack patterns. The timing takes a while to get down. He does a lot of damage. He has a lot of health, and he can switch from one attack to another. He would probably be in this category if not for the fact that you fight him relatively early in the game and that his boss run is truly horrendous. Old Iron King, this might be a surprise, goes into this category because he has this, like, I don't know what you want to call it, a gulch, or you fight him on a very narrow platform that has a bunch of holes in it. And he has all these attacks that basically just try to push you into the holes. And if you're trying to dodge him, you'll often fall into the holes. I've died a lot of times on him just because I keep falling off the platform. And I don't like bosses where that's the difficulty, some bullshit environmental thing. So he's just going to go in there. It's not a fun boss fight. It's one of the worst in the franchise. Uh Scorpion Najka is one of the just most forgettable bosses ever. It's okay. It's not good. It's not bad. Royal Rat Authority goes into the unfair, overpowered, or unfun. It's basically like Capra Demon 2.0. You have this giant, ultra powerful, ultra aggressive dog, and then you also will have plague rats. And if the plague rats infect you, you're fucked. But if you beat them, the boss is relatively easy. So the whole boss fight comes down to the first 10 seconds or first 5 seconds. If you can kill the rats, then you win this boss fight easily. If you don't kill the rats, you're completely fucked and there's nothing you can do. It's just not fun. The only redeeming feature is there's a bonfire right next to it. So that helps. I died a couple times on this one and I was swearing the whole time. Prowling Mages and Congregation is a joke. Duke's Dear Freya, kind of a weird boss fight, kind of a weird boss. The run up to her is pretty just kind of, it's a lot of stuff you have to go. The boss fight isn't too difficult. I don't have a ton to say about it. Royal Rat Vanguard goes into that because petrification is not fun, curse is not fun, and it's just the boss fight's not particularly difficult. But I don't like when boss fights rely on status conditions and the environment. It's just I don't think I've died fighting Royal Rat Vanguard, but it's just not been fun. Uh the Rodden is somewhere between moderate or normal and tough but fair. There's a decent. I don't think the run to him is particularly bad. Once you get his patterns down, he's not very difficult. He does a lot of damage if memory serves, but overall not really that challenging. Twin Dragon Riders are going to put his total joke. By the time you get to that part in the game, it's basically just double of the first boss, and you can probably kill them in like 4 or 5 hits. There being two of them doesn't really matter because one of them keeps its distance, and he probably won't even really have time to snipe you with arrows. So the boss is just extremely easy. Looking Glass Knight is really fun. I like the boss design. I like the arena. The gimmick is kind of fun. He could either be tough but fair or gimmick, depending on how you want to do it. I think it's a better version of the monk, the old monk boss. It's one I enjoyed quite a bit. It depends on who they summon, but if you have pretty high DPS, which I normally do, you can normally kill the Looking Glass Knight before he even summons anybody. So I'm gonna put him in the tough but fair. Demon of Song, I don't even know. I'm just gonna put him under. Oh no, that's Sir Alone. Definitely doesn't belong. Demon of Song goes there, I guess. I died a bunch of times the first time I fought him because I didn't really know what I was doing. Once I actually just sat down and tried to figure out what was going on, he became extremely easy, and I can beat him without barely taking damage. Veldstad I put in tough but fair. He's to me kind of the epitome of a tough but fair boss. He's big, aggressive, and deals a lot of damage, but he's relatively easy to dodge, and there's quite a bit of cover in the area you fight him in. My biggest complaint, as with most DS2 bosses, is just it's a long run to get to him. And if you have to fight him a couple of times, it just gets really annoying. King Vendrick could be gimmick, tough but fair, or unfair, overpowered, or unfun. I'm gonna put him, I think, in gimmick. Because if you get all 4 and 5 giant souls, you can kill him pretty quick. Getting the last one is almost impossible because it's the fucking ancient dragon. But even once that happens, he has just extremely high damage output. And it's, you know what, I'm going to move him up. He's another boss that even with 4 dragon souls, half giant souls, he just has extremely high HP. And it just takes forever and a day to kill him. Sir Alone is just really tough because he's super fast, super aggressive. He has a lot of health and he does a lot of damage. That being said, it is a very fun boss fight, and they did build up Sir Alone quite a bit, and it's nice that they were able to deliver. Guardian Dragon I thought was a fun boss, but nothing special. Ancient Dragon might be the worst boss fight in the entire franchise. I've tried to fight him once or twice. Basically, I apparently there's some way to dodge his attack by going under his tail. His attack almost always kills you in one shot, even if you have endgame equipment. He has an absurd amount of health. I can only imagine how long this battle would take if you actually did the full one. But it is truly horrendous. It's just it is. I'm gonna put the Giant Lord up here too. A lot of people like to cheese this boss because he's not particularly difficult. What's annoying is the explosions that happen around him while you're trying to fight him that can just kill you. The memory levels, particularly that one, are very kind of luck dependent. and if you can get down the like explosions from the siege weapons. I don't find the boss fight fun. I just find it annoying. Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. Um, People might disagree with me. My issue is, well, I do like this boss fight. I don't think it's well designed because there's no way to break up aggro. You just fight them on a completely flat place. Like when you're fighting Ornstein and Smo, there's some pillars you can use to try to fight them one at a time. Same thing for Ruin Sentinels. For these two, you're fighting two very aggressive enemies with no cover whatsoever. If you summon for this boss fight, it's very easy. I tried soloing it for the first time when I was replaying it, and I got my ass kicked a bunch of times. It's a it's a challenging one. I just don't think it's very well designed. Nashandra, I'm just gonna put under normal. She can do curse. Overall, she's pretty easy relative to when in the game you fight her. Dark Lurker, I've never done the quest line, so I have no idea how hard he is. People say he's really hard, so I'm just gonna put him there. I'm gonna put the gank boss fight into the unfun. Gank boss fights are never fun, and that's one that I would definitely say isn't. All three of them are very aggressive. The arena helps out a bit, but they have a lot of health, and it takes a long time to just wheedle down one of their health. If you can kill one of them, it's okay. I remember the run to them being pretty long, though, and pretty arduous. So it's definitely not one of my favorite boss fights. Elena Squalid Queen, I found moderately difficult. Once again, my complaint is I think it took you have to do a bunch of platforming to get to her. It's very much luck based because sometimes she'll summon Velstadt, sometimes she'll summon like a skeleton. It's an RNG based battle, but not bad. Send the Slumbering Dragon could go into build dependent, gimmick, or brutally or unfair, overpowered or unfun. If you're playing a melee build, this is just a nightmare of a boss battle because he just keeps flying around. It's very RNG dependent. Sometimes you'll get it where he just keeps flying around shooting fire at you, and you're just fucked and you can't even really attack him. If you do attack him, his blood is made out of acid, so it destroys your weapon. And if you're playing on PC, your weapons get destroyed twice as fast. So there are times when I fought him where I went through like 3 weapons without killing him. I'm gonna confess, when I replayed the game, I used a cheat to turn off durability because durability in Dark Souls 2 is fucked, and that is not just me. That was an actual glitch they never really fixed. So it is just a painful boss fight. That's not fun. Smelter Demon, Magic Smelter Demon also goes into this category. He would be in here, but it is the worst boss run in any of the Souls games for any boss. It is just completely and totally unacceptable how long the run is to get to the Smelter Demon. You're probably almost out of Estus flasks by the time you get to him, or you just have to fight through a huge number of guys. It's just really unacceptable. He's not even a mandatory boss. I thought you had to fight him because I just got lost, but that was not a pleasant experience. Fume Knight is arguably the hardest boss. I'd say either him or Dark Eater Midier is probably the hardest boss. He's just extremely aggressive. He's difficult to kind of predict, and he has a lot of health, and it's very hard to find opportunities to attack him because he has both his big sword and his small sword, and he switches between them. I've never been able to solo him. I normally need to summon at least an NPC to break up aggro. So it's not a bad boss fight, but it is very, very difficult. Uh Bride of Ash, I didn't even think you could fight her. I've never fought her. I didn't even know that, so I'm just gonna put it there. Elva the King's Pet, he goes there. He goes there. Invisible enemies just suck. They're not fun. They're not interesting. These just are terrible. So I'm not even going to mention them. I just hated fighting these guys. Burn in hell. I didn't even know you could fight her. Bird Ivory King is either brutally difficult or tough but fair. I beat him the second time I fought him. The first time after I actually gathered the knights. It was a very close battle, and I think I had a player summon, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a good end to Dark Souls 2. Eldia's Flagolar, the First Sin. I haven't actually fought him, so I didn't. I played the game before the First Sin, Scholar, the First Sin came out, so I can't really say too much about him, to be honest. Okay, so moving on to Dark Souls 3. Lundex Gundyr. Um, I'm probably going to put him in tough but fair. The most difficult part of him is you can't level up and you can't really get new gear before you fight him. And a lot of the Souls games is if you come across a difficult boss, it's you try to come up with a plan. For this one, you just kind of have to figure it out and tough it out. And if you can get past him, the rest of the game is kind of downhill from there. So he can either be here, or I might just put him there because there's a lack of options at that point in the game, and you just have to suck it up and beat him somehow. So I'm gonna put him there, but your mileage may vary. Vorst out of Boreal Valley, just a mildly, just a normal boss. Not a lot to say about him. Curse Rotted Greatwood could be here, or he could be Gimmick. I'm gonna put him into Gimmick. He's not difficult, but like hit you falling down is just lame. His weird, gross sores are lame. It's just not a fun boss fight and not a pleasant experience. Crystal Sage is build dependent. He's easy if you're a melee character. He's difficult as a caster because he's very fast and he's very magic resistant. So if you can just wail on him with like a heavy weapon, he dies pretty quick. But otherwise, it's just kind of not very fun. Beacons of the Deep is likewise. They're quite magic resistant, and there's a lot of them. If you have a great sword or some sort of large weapon, you can just cleave through them en masse, and it's rather easy. If you don't have that, then it can be challenging to pick out the guy you have to shoot, and then get a clear shot lined up and not have other people jump in front of it. It could just be kind of annoying. Fair and Undead Legion, I'm actually going to put as brutally difficult. I find this boss very hard, particularly the second phase, just because it's super aggressive. It's super aggressive. You don't have much of a time to heal or do anything else or counterattack. And it's just kind of one of those fights where you're just dodging constantly, maybe getting a hit or two in. That being said, it is a fun boss fight, but it's one that's very difficult and one I don't think I've ever really been able to solo. I'm sure it's a lot easier as a caster though. High Lord Wolnir can either be here or here. I'm gonna put him as a gimmick boss. I admit I died a couple times against him because I didn't really know what the fuck I was supposed to do. I thought I was supposed to just attack him. I didn't even really figure out the gold band thing. So I was just attacking him normally, and I wasn't really aiming for the bands, and I wasn't doing much damage. So I thought I just had to get to the end of the level. It was kind of like ceaseless discharge, and then I could just one shot him. But it took me a while to figure it out. After that, he's kind of a total joke, but it's kind of a challenge. If you don't know how to beat him, Old Demon King I found pretty easy. Just a fun boss. I don't think I've ever died to him, but the boss run to him isn't too bad, like most of the boss runs in DS3. So not a lot to say. Fun boss. Bjorn the Last Giant, obviously a gimmick boss, also a pretty long boss run. I don't like gimmick bosses normally. It's not fun. It's not interesting. It just kind of sucks. So sorry, Yorn. Pontus Sullivan is either here or here. I'm gonna put him in tough but fair. One of my favorite boss fights in the franchise. Just a really cool looking boss. Pontiff Sullivan is hyper aggressive. Um, does a lot of damage, but he has pretty predictable attacks, and you can dodge him fairly easily once you get it down. It is a very adrenaline pumping boss fight, and he is pretty difficult, but definitely one of the more fun bosses in the franchise. Eldritch Devourer of Souls is also here, although once again, it might be build dependent. So I think he's pretty resistant to magic. It's a difficult boss fight, but once you kind of get the patterns down, it's not too hard. He does have a lot of health. It's a little hard to kind of figure out how his attack patterns go, but overall, fun boss. Definitely like the lore about him, and it's nice to be fighting someone in that room again. Another one of my favorite bosses, Dancer of the Boreal Valley, is one of those bosses who is extremely difficult until they're not. She has very irregular attack patterns, and the tempo of the fight is really strange. There is a lot of cover to break up aggro, which is nice. And once you kind of get her moves down, it's pretty easy. But it can be very difficult the first couple of times you try to fight. It is a very fun boss fight, and I do really like the mask you get for killing her. Dragon Slayer armor I found really hard. I don't know if that's just me. I found him harder than Nameless King, just because he has a lot of health, he does a lot of damage, and he's pretty aggressive. It might be a boss that's easier if you're a caster. I just got my ass kicked by this boss a bunch of times before I was finally able to. Not a lot else besides that, just a very good kind of heavy armored turtle boss. Orseus the Consumed King is build dependent. If you're a tank or melee weapon character, he's really easy. If you're a caster, he's really difficult because he's very resistant to magic. Next we have the Gundyr Lundex. I'm gonna put him in tough but fair. I don't remember too much about him, but I remember him being fairly difficult, being pretty aggressive and having pretty high damage. I don't think he's as hard though as his earlier version. Actually, where did I put the earlier? I should probably move him up if I. Oh, whatever. Uh, Lothric and Lorien. I'm gonna put them in tough but fair. This is my favorite boss fight in the entire series, partially because of the music, partially just because of the setting. It's just a lot of fun. Um, it's a boss that can be good if you're a DPS tank build, because it is very much a DPS race, particularly in part two. If you can knock Lothric and Lorien out pretty quick, you can kind of beat them before they start to weigh you down with their aggressive attacks. But overall, it's a difficult boss fight, but definitely one of the most satisfying, and one I'd say is very balanced and fair. Ancient Wyvern is a gimmick. It's one of the worst gimmick bosses in the franchise. You have to go through an extremely long, tedious level full of lizard men that do a huge amount of damage and can one shot you or knock you off a cliff or all kinds of other stuff. It's not fun. It's not interesting. It just sucks. Let's move on. Nameless King, this might be controversial. I died once against the Nameless King, so I didn't know what I was doing, and then I beat him the second time. It's a boss where it's good if you are a tank build, because you can survive his combos and you can take a couple hits. And part of his thing is he's just very aggressive. But his moves are very heavily telegraphed, and it's not too hard to dodge or block. Plus, lightning is fairly easy to resist. So, one of the best boss fights in the game. Really love fighting the Nameless King. He goes there. Soul of Cinder, this, once again, people are probably going to disagree with me. I found this boss fight very difficult. Super aggressive bosses I always find kind of hard. If you don't have summons, he just wails on you, and there's not a lot you can do. You just have to keep like rolling out of the way. He has a lot of health, and the boss fight has multiple phases, so you have to keep adjusting on the fly. I haven't, I think, succeeded in soloing him. I find him to be a fairly difficult boss, to be honest, but my order is kind of different than a lot of people's. It's a lot of it's build based. Aggressive bosses are tricky for me because I can't parry, and yeah. Let's see here. The wolf and gravedigger, I don't really remember too much about it. I just remember it being not too hard. Um, Father, it's Andriel and Sister Freyed. Um, if you summon, it's probably here. Normally, it's probably about there. I actually find the first phase of it the hardest because I'm not very good at fighting invisible opponents. The later phases are mostly difficult because you panic because there's so much shit going on. It really isn't a gimmick. It really isn't a gag fight because you tend to be able to fight them off one at a time, and they don't seem to both kind of clobber you at once. But it is difficult. It is just confusing and kind of chaotic later on. So I'd say it was a difficult boss, but it was probably the only good thing in Ashes of Endariel. Black Flame Freed. Okay, Twin Demons. Twin Demons and Demon Prince go up here, which people will probably disagree with, but um I don't like bosses whose difficulty is based on health. This boss's difficulty is solely based on health. It takes so long, particularly if you like me and you got the DLC when you were playing your main character on New Game Plus. To just get through them, you just have to constantly wail on them. You start to get bored. You run out of Estus flasks. It's just not fun. It's one of the single like most tedious, annoying moments in the entire franchise. I really, really don't like that boss fight. Dark Eater Meteor is here. I'd say either him or Fume Knight is the hardest boss in the franchise, at least of the games that I've played. He's just really difficult. He's hyper aggressive. His attacks have incredible range to them. If you have a summon, it becomes doable, but otherwise, you're just going to get your ass kicked over and over and over again. Dark Eater Meteor does not fuck around. Now, full disclosure, I only played Ring City with the Cinders mod. I beat the Demon Princes using before I got it, but when I was replaying DS2 because I hadn't beat DS3 because I hadn't beat Ring City, I did use the Cinders mod, which is easier and harder because it does give you regenerating MP, but the bosses have like 4 times as much health. So it's pick your poison. Um, Spear of the Church is a gimmick boss fight. If you're offline, it's extremely easy. If you're online, it's extremely difficult. And finally, Slave Knight Gil, I'm just going to put here. He was not difficult when I fought him, but I was playing on Cinder's mod, and I just kept rolling away and shooting him with hexes. I'd imagine for a caster, he's a lot easier than fighting him as a melee character. Definitely a very difficult, aggressive boss who kind of summarizes all the aggressive bosses like Artorias, Gwyn. He also has a ranged attack, which makes him kind of different. I don't think he was a very good boss to be the last boss of the franchise. It is what it is. So though that's my big take on the bosses, the categories. I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless, and more content to come.